everyone, and welcome. If you're getting ready for that big unit exam, you have come to the perfect place. We are going to break down two whole chapters and boil them down into a single story. It's the story of a massive chain reaction that kicks off with just one machine and ends up changing, well, pretty much everything. Okay, let's get into it. So when we talk about a revolution, what do we really mean? It's just a huge, fundamental change in how things are done. And our whole goal here is to connect the dots. We're going to see exactly how the Industrial Revolution, which was a revolution in how we work, lit the fuse for a whole series of new revolutions in ideas, in government, and in the way society itself was structured. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start in a world that ran on pure muscle power. Then we'll trace this incredible chain reaction of inventions, one after another. We'll see how all that progress created a brand new set of problems for people, which then, you guessed it, sparked political revolutions across the ocean and right back home in Europe. It's all one big story of cause and effect. Okay, first things first, let's set the scene. Imagine the world before, say, the 1750s. Pretty much everything ran on the power of people or animals. If you wanted something, it was made by hand, probably at home, by families who'd been living in the same village for generations. Life was local, it was slow, and it was about to change forever. And this brings us to a really crucial exam question. Why on earth do we call it a revolution? Well, because the shift from using hand tools at home to giant machines in a factory wasn't just some small improvement. It was a total, world-shattering transformation. It changed where people lived, how they spent their days, and even what they believed was possible.
So why England? Why did it all start there? Now you're going to want to pay close attention here because this is another one of those key questions. For this fire to really catch, you needed a special recipe with 3 specific ingredients, and England had them all. It had tons of natural resources. We're talking coal to burn, iron to build, and rivers to power. It had a massive workforce of people flooding into the cities, and it had capital, big piles of money from investors who were ready to build factories. Now we get to the real heart of the story, this amazing domino effect. See, the Industrial Revolution wasn't just one big invention. It was a chain reaction, where every single invention solved one problem, but created a brand new one. And that new problem, well, it sparked the need for the next invention down the line. So the very first domino to fall was in the textile industry, making cloth. Back in 1733, a guy named John Kay invents the flying shuttle. It lets weavers make cloth twice as fast. Sounds great, right? Well, it created a huge bottleneck. Suddenly, the weavers were so fast, the spinners couldn't keep up. They were desperate for more yarn. And the solution? That came from James Hargreaves and his spinning jenny, which could spin 8 threads at once. Problem solved. Next domino, please. Okay, so now factories can spin yarn and weave cloth like there's no tomorrow. What's the new problem? They need a mountain of raw cotton to feed these hungry machines. But cleaning the seeds out of raw cotton by hand was just agonizingly slow. This brings us to the next big challenge, and the solution came from an American inventor named Eli Whitney. His cotton gin could clean cotton 50 times faster than a human could. It was exactly what the British mills needed. And, Whitney didn't stop there. He also came up with this brilliant idea of mass production. By making identical, interchangeable parts, in his case for guns, he created a system that would become the absolute foundation of modern industry. Think about it. If a part on your machine broke, you didn't need to custom make a new one. You just grabbed another identical one off the shelf. This was a total game changer. So what was the next problem? Power. You see, the first factories had to be built right next to fast-moving rivers to turn water wheels. But in 1773, James Watt comes along and perfects a steam engine that could power machinery literally anywhere. This untethered factories from the riversides. And as these new machines got bigger and more powerful, they needed something stronger than plain old iron. And that's where Henry Bessemer comes in, with his new process for making steel. Steel gave the revolution its tough, durable backbone. Okay, so let's recap. We've got factories that can be built anywhere, just churning out huge amounts of steel and textiles. The next problem is pretty obvious, right? How in the world do you move all this stuff? How do you get the raw materials to the factories and then get the finished goods to the market without it taking forever and costing a fortune? People tried a few different things. A guy named John McAdam figured out how to build much better roads out of crushed stone, which definitely helped. And people built canals to ship heavy stuff like coal. But both of those had their limits.
What the industrial age really truly needed was a quantum leap forward. And it got one, by putting James Watt's steam engine on wheels. And that leap forward, of course, was the railroad. In 1829, a locomotive built by George Stephenson, famously called the Rocket, hit a speed of 30 miles per hour. Now, that might not sound like much to us, but you have to understand, at the time, this was mind-blowingly fast. The railroad quickly became the circulatory system for this new industrial world, pumping goods and people around at speeds nobody had ever dreamed of. And right here, this is the most important pivot in our entire story. This is the moment where the revolution of machines starts to directly ignite a revolution of people. Because for all the incredible inventions and all the wealth being created, this new industrial world came at a staggering human cost. It solved old problems, sure, but it created a whole new set of social ones. Just take a look at these numbers for Manchester. I mean, it's just unbelievable. In a single century, it goes from a decent-sized town to a massive, sprawling industrial city. And this wasn't just happening in Manchester. It was happening all over Britain, as millions of people poured in from the countryside, looking for factory jobs, cramming into these new, often chaotic urban centers. And life in these new cities? Well, life was brutal. People were packed into filthy, unsanitary slums. The factory work itself was incredibly dangerous. We're talking 14-hour days with no safety nets if you got hurt. Child labor was everywhere. And for the first time in history, you see the formation of this huge, new, impoverished urban working class. And their suffering would become the fuel for the next wave of revolutions. But at the same time all this hardship was happening, the air was also buzzing with powerful new ideas. Ideas about liberty, equality, and the right of a nation to rule itself. And these ideas, combined with all the chaos happening back in Europe, crossed the Atlantic Ocean. They gave colonies the perfect window of opportunity to fight for their freedom and break away from their European rulers. And you can see the global impact right here. First up in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture leads the first successful slave revolt in modern history. Amazing. Then, down in Mexico, a priest named Miguel Hidalgo sparks a massive rebellion. And in South America, you have these two incredible leaders, Simón Bolívar fighting from the north and José San Martín from the south, who together lead armies that liberate an entire continent. Make sure you remember these names. They are the founding fathers of Latin American independence. Okay, let's bring the story back to Europe. The absolute chaos of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, plus all the social turmoil from industrialization, it left the old guard, the kings and the nobles, completely terrified. They saw a massive battle brewing for the future of Europe, and they were determined to crush these new ideas and win. To powerful leaders like Prince Metternich of Austria, these revolutionary ideas weren't progress, they were a disease, and he saw himself as the doctor with the cure. At a big meeting called the Congress of Vienna in 1815, his goal was painfully simple: turn back the clock. He wanted to stamp out nationalism and liberty and put the old absolute kings back on their thrones all across Europe. And this sets up the great political fight of the 19th century. On one side, you had the conservatives. These were mostly nobles and wealthy landowners who loved the old system of all-powerful kings. On the other side, you have the liberals. They were mainly middle-class business owners and merchants who wanted to limit the king's power with things like constitutions and give more say to elected parliaments. This clash led to even more turmoil, like the revolution in France in 1830 that put a new citizen king, Louis Philippe, on the throne. But for a lot of people in that new working class, even liberalism didn't seem to go far enough. They started listening to a much more radical idea: socialism. Thinkers like Louis Blanc over in France started arguing that the real root of the problem was the private ownership of factories. Their solution: the government, the state, should own and operate industry to make sure the wealth was shared more fairly and that workers weren't exploited. This idea was electrifying to the workers and absolutely terrifying to everyone else. And the most influential socialist thinker of them all, without a doubt, was Karl Marx. He looked at all of human history and saw one big story: a constant struggle between the haves and the have-nots. He argued that the industrial working class, who he called the proletariat, was being exploited by the factory owners. His solution wasn't just reform, it was a full-blown revolution. And his famous call to action in the Communist Manifesto would inspire movements around the world for more than a century to come. So there you have it, the whole chain reaction. It starts with a flying shuttle and a little textile mill, which leads to the spinning jenny, which leads to the cotton gin, to the whole factory system, to the steam engine and steel, to the railroad, which creates the terrible social problems of industrial cities, which then sparks political revolutions and these huge ideological fights between conservatives, liberals, and socialists. It's all one long connected story. And that really brings us to our final thought. This process didn't just end in the 1800s. It literally built the world we live in today. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Which of these dominoes are still falling?